What do youth and young adults gain from and contribute to civic learning? In this powerful youth-led session, Raj Vinakoda of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars moderated a conversation with 4 young civic leaders. They spoke candidly about what they've gained from civic education and how they're giving back, from organizing political dialogue clubs and serving on school boards to leading veterans mentorship and reviving campus forums for civil discourse. Each panelist emphasized the need for respectful dialogue across differences. They reflected on the challenges of polarization, both in person and online, and made a compelling case for more civic learning that blends knowledge, empathy, and real-world problem-solving.
Welcome. My name is Raj Vinakoda. I'm president at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, and I have the best job of all today, which is a chance to moderate this panel with the young people, young adults with whom we're actually trying to engage to do all this work as well as possible. So without further ado, what we're going to do is move into the conversation. We have a few questions that we set up for ourselves, and then this whole morning's conversation created another 27 questions that I'm going to ask in 10-second bites. No, I'm just joking. But we do have a lot coming out of even this morning that we're very interested in engaging in. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists, while they answer this first question, to also introduce themselves a little bit, to give you a sense of who they are, where they come from, and what they've done. And Sophia, we'll start with you. What's been formative for you in terms of your civic development? And welcome.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Sophia Crayutu, and I'm a senior at Bloomington High School North in Bloomington, Indiana, so pretty far from here. I run my own organization at home. It's called Global Learners, and it's an organization for K through 8th grade current events education. I'm also the leader of my school's political discussion club and the founder of my city's first ever government-sponsored program to teach students about legislation and legislative advocacy. So I think that really working with young students and being able to connect one-on-one has been formative for my civic identity. And I've been able to understand really what they need and how they work best and connect with them on that level. And that's kind of trickled up to the high school level. And now, I'm able to engage in better dialogue and conversations with my peers because I understand, where they're coming from, and I've been able to understand many more experiences through these conversations.
Sophia, thank you. And I know we're going to dive much more deeply into some of that and what you've learned. Let's go next to Ishan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ishan. I go to Doherty Valley High School, just about an hour away from here, and I'm a junior. I'd say 2 key experiences have been really formative in shaping my civic identity and what it really means to be a citizen of America for me. The first one is debate. I compete in congressional debate, where I model United States representatives and senators for the collaboration on policy that kind of helps Americans and affects the average American. I think the best example and best learning experience I had in terms of pluralistic civic education was actually debating last June in Iowa for Debate Nationals. I was put in a chamber with 17 other representatives. None of them were from California, so they were all new people who I'd never met before. We were debating issues from immigration to healthcare to paid leave policies. So you can imagine how widespreading these views were. But really, the goal was create a consensus within the chamber and pass policy in a way that models real Congress and in a way that really gets things done. And I think where I've been able to really extend that into tangible participation is on the local level. I serve as a student board member on my county's Board of Education, so I represent about 160,000 K-12 students. And I think the big part about county offices of education is to serve the most underserved and disadvantaged students who may be expelled from their home districts, need extra services, have learning disabilities. And so sitting on the board, I provide a student-centric input by connecting with these students and my peers across the county and sharing my voice on budget decisions, charter school renewals, and those different policies. But yeah, those 2 experiences have been really formative.
Thank you, Ishan. Yu Ching, you win the award for both the shortest commute today and the longest distance from your actual home in New Zealand. So thank you for coming here. Tell us a little bit about what you do here.
Thanks very much, Raj. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. It's an honor to be on this panel with some amazing young people doing incredible work in various areas of civic education. My name is Yu Ching. I'm a senior at Stanford studying philosophy and religion. I'm from New Zealand, and my civic story begins with my upbringing in New Zealand, a small town on the East Coast, Napier. It's very laid back. It's very different from the way things are here in the US. And I think that's been incredibly formative for me. Being in a place where there isn't much disagreement and where your political beliefs don't define you has really provided a basis of comparison for me as I've come into college and come to the US, and seeing how different the political environment has been, and political identities, political beliefs becoming almost sectarian and defining individuals, friend groups, social groups, relationships, and everything in between. And my civic identity has really been shaped at college through my experiences and my interactions with people, my fellow students, faculty, staff, and the folks that I've been interacted with during my summer internships. So on campus, I began work in constructive dialogue with the Deliberative Democracy Lab, and then I ventured into reviving the Stanford Political Union, which was first founded in 1938. It has an incredibly long and rich history, but it's been inactive for a long time. And we revived it as a club, not a debating club like our East Coast peers, but a place for dialogue and greater mutual understanding with the aim of bridging the political divides that beset us today. So those are my main experiences, yeah.
Thank you. Mahavir, your experiences come from slightly different perspectives and experiences. Tell us more.
Yeah, so hello everyone, my name is Mahavir Kalarai. I guess what defines me is my upbringing. So first generation American, both my parents immigrated from England, and I found myself with this interesting question of how do I give back to a country that has given so much to me? So for me, it was military service. So I went ahead and enlisted in the Marine Corps at the age of 17, and that was really interesting because as a senior in high school, we only get, I think, one semester of kind of political science, civic education, and next thing you know, I'm in MEPS. MEPS is the place where we all enlist in the Marine Corps, and raise my right hand and swear an oath to the Constitution, a document which I probably did not read. So I was like, what am I getting myself into here? But it's something that I honestly thought was the coolest thing in the world. I thought serving my nation was my calling. It is my calling. It's a way for me to give back, and served about 4 years active duty. During that time, I met some amazing people, and then went to the reserves and wanted to contribute more to society, go, pursue an education. And I think that shaped me in a different way. Kind of like Secretary Mattis described, is veterans have a hard time finding their place after service. It's a real interesting transition. We call it the transition period, and the Marine Corps does a lot of good things. They have SEPs and TAPs, so you can separate and transition, get a job. It's actually what got me placed with Lam Research, which I think is the coolest thing ever. But veterans can be kind of lost, and so I think that's where I really wanted to give back to veterans. So I volunteer at the Sacramento Treatments Court as a veterans mentor, where we get paired with veterans to help understand, what got them into that place, and how can we get them out, right? We don't want to see veterans incarcerated. We don't want to see them in the legal system. So how can we get them out? Another thing is I grew up in Elk Grove, went back to Elk Grove. I participate in what's called the Consumnes Legacy Foundation. There we want to honor veterans by making a memorial park, and so that's the current project we're working on. So we're trying to seek funding to build a park, and you can buy bricks, and I know I just purchased my brick, I think about a week ago, which is kind of cool because I can say Sergeant Callie on there.
Nice.
But yeah, that's a little bit of who I am.
So this is great. So where I'd like to start this conversation is one of the themes that we've heard through the morning, and that I think is really embedded in what you've all said. And we'll start with Ishan and then move down this way, which is this notion of being exposed to new ideas and debate and engaging across difference, right? We're doing it in very different environments, from boards to military, so on and so forth. Tell me a little bit, and tell us a little bit, how your path has exposed you to have to be able to engage in thoughtful dialogue and trying to come to common problem solving. You want to start, Ishan?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think I'd go along the same two examples that I brought up to start with. In the realm of debate, I think one thing you really realize is with National Congress, it's pretty clear how much polarization there is in getting bills passed and getting issues decided upon. And so when speech and debate and the National Speech and Debate Organization is calling upon high schoolers to discuss the same issues that adults are discussing and not being able to come up with agreements upon. One thing I've really taken away is debate has been a way for pluralism without polarization, in the sense that youth are generating opinions right now, and that makes them innately more open to learning more. I think as they're researching and as youth are hearing from media on political events, I think discussing with them and discussing collaboratively within the realm of debate has really shaped my opinion on how do I understand what other people are saying, understand their opinions, and then understand the underlying framework behind everyone's opinions. And I think that underlying framework that really draws young people together will be civics curriculum, because there's a set of enduring values and principles from things like popular sovereignty to federalism that I think can really define our nuanced opinions on different policies and different issues. And I think that's the framework that really draws us together. And I've kind of been lucky to be exposed to that with activities like debate. And yeah, I'd say that's really formative.
Javier?
I think so I think for us, it's a little bit different from our perspective, right? So our engagement is more geared around, from a military perspective or veterans perspective, is we all come and join with a sense of pride and patriotism. But we're not so concerned about how it came out and what it did. We really just want to get the mission done. We're really focused. But building in dialogue amongst each other is really, really nice, because there's a phrase called hurry up and wait in the military. And so we have a lot of time where we can wait and we can really get into that dialogue and discuss and have some great conversations. But what I found is we typically don't talk too much about civics and things like that. We more talk about what brings us together and how we can relate to each other, and that's kind of. Yeah.
Were you in that environment having to tackle or wrestle with how do you solve problems even if you disagree? What did that look like, or did it? Was it just orders?
Yeah, so of course we disagree a lot. So disagreeing is healthy. It's quite healthy. You need to have that disagreement because it's how you get the mission done. So at a very tactical level, if there's not always one way to do something. There's multiple ways. And so when we can kind of collaborate, I think is a better word. So when we can collaborate and really look at the problem at hand and understand there's different ways of solving the problem, right? And one viewpoint is not the best viewpoint. There are other views that you can use to solve the issue, and is understanding that and coming at it with a perspective of change. So understanding that the viewpoint can change and that, hey, maybe my idea is not the best idea.
So I'm interested. I'm going to dig a little deeper on this because this is fascinating, thinking of different perspectives. Do you think that you and your colleagues brought that to the Marines, or did you learn it while you were there?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? Because in the Marine Corps, and very early in the Marines, let's think about it as junior Marines, as like a Lance Corporal. So Lance Corporal, you're not really too much of a leader. You're not a non-commissioned officer. So from that point, it's almost ingrained in you. Just do as you're told. Mm-hmm. And then once you move, take that little stepping stone, right? And you become a junior leader. You become that corporal or that sergeant. It becomes quite interesting because then the Marine Corps challenges you. It starts to ask you, hey, it's time for you to make decisions now, right? And you need to go and do this action. Mm-hmm. So I guess a really simple one for me is readiness. If we were doing helicopter maintenance, something as simple as helicopter maintenance, right? And you want to tactically load aircraft with ordnance, right? Is there a better way of doing it? Of course there is. And there's not always one set of way of doing it. There's guidelines, there's principles, there's rules, but it can change and it can get better. And so it's interesting. So I always challenge my Marines, is there a better way to do it? And there's one example I have in my mind is the Marine Corps has this interesting way where you can bore sight, a 20 millimeter cannon, and you have to use this amazing equipment that somebody much smarter than I was probably used to develop it, and it takes hours, and we don't have that time. So what you can do is you can understand that there's different principles, and you can do what's called hasty bore sighting. And so these Marines put up a plywood board and said, hey, we can go ahead and bore sight the cannon in this way. And it challenged us to think a little bit differently. And then how does that relate to civics is it challenges different thought.
Yeah.
And it means that not everything is black and white. There's certain things that you can change. There's certain things that you can do differently. And I think that's one of the coolest things about the Marine Corps is it brings that thought out of you. So junior Marines, so when I was a sergeant or a team chief, I could challenge my corporals and ask them, is there a better way to do something? And many times I'd get, hey, Sergeant Callie, we should do this. And it's like, you know what, man, you're absolutely right, let's do that.
That's great. Thank you for the story and the depth. Yu-Ching?
In the college, I guess only the Stanford context, because that's what I have personally experienced. The need for dialogue as a civic skill is really rooted in the issue of divide, of polarization, not the polarization of ideas, but rather the polarization of affect polarization. This notion that we attribute ideas to people in a way that it becomes their identity, and divide people into us and them. So we make caricatures of people with whom we disagree, and we paint this image of a villain as someone who has an opposing worldview from us. And this became really salient to me my freshman year at Stanford when I engage in discussions as a philosophy major. You do this all the time, late at night, with folks who had different views than me about a range of issues, including affirmative action. And at that point, I took a more skeptical position towards affirmative action, and my interlocutor took a position that, I guess, championed affirmative action. And I thought we had a constructive disagreement, but what came out of that discussion was a caricature of me as someone who is a conservative, who is racist, who believes these things about different races and X, Y, Z. And that is an issue. And then we stopped being friends because of our differences in belief. So part of the issue isn't just these differences in belief, but also the other beliefs and personalities that one may attribute to you because you hold a specific belief. So I think that's really the core of the issue. And the need for dialogue comes in because at the Stanford Political Union and other places on campus, dialogue between people of opposing views helps people to break down these caricatures and misperceptions of one another. Not that they'll agree or compromise on their views, but just that they can live better together, as you'll have to on a college campus. So through dialogue at the Political Union, our mission is to expose students to diverse perspectives, teach them the tools to disagree better, and also inspire them to engage civically in deeper ways, such as through volunteering, through voting, and other ways. Yeah.
It's a really interesting experience. I'm sorry that you had it. A lot of the research that shows that when you're able to break through requires not only the civil discourse, but then the application of it. You need to be able to then engage in collaborative problem solving with those people with whom you don't agree. And you're just providing very specific examples of that, right? The conversation, but then the application becomes important too.
Absolutely, and I think the way the Stanford Political Union has set up our discussions really encapsulates the comprehensive approach we take to address the issue of affect polarization. So for our Wednesday night weekly discussions, it's always about an emerging topical issue, and we bring a bunch of folks, students together, usually 50 to 80 people in the room, and have them discuss these issues. And the first 20 minutes of the hour is context setting. So we show folks a range of news clippings, different sources about the issue. We don't try to be neutral and frame the issue in a way that's neutral, but rather we say, this is what Fox News is saying, this is what CNN is saying. Make you will out of this. And then we dive into small moderator group discussions with norms and guiding and moderators. And the norms really emphasize that these discussions are not debates, but rather conversations for greater understanding in the ethos of curiosity and empathy. And finally, we have a big group share out where people synthesize their discussions and their ideas and kind of discover ways to carry them forth in their own lives.
Thank you. Sophia, so how about your experience and how that's helped to develop civil discourse skills for you?
So yeah, my town is extremely liberal, but we're obviously a little pocket in a very conservative state, you know, Indiana. Yet my school really attracts diverse viewpoints still, and we have a pretty big mix. I mean, we have a lot of kids coming in from rural areas, but then we have the Bloomington kids that are, you know, more centralized. They've grown up in Indiana University, that town, which is very liberal itself. So, you know, I noticed that there was a gap specifically when I was in a history class. I remember this my freshman year. We would have conversations about current events. We would talk about all of this stuff, but then students would start attacking each other. And most of our clubs are very STEM focused. So we didn't really have any opportunity for kids to travel outside of this zone and communicate and, you know, go further into topics that we were talking about in the classroom so they could really dive into them further. So I wanted to create a space for students to be able to do that, and this took the form of creating my own political discussion club. And I wanted to emphasize that this was not supposed to be a debate club. You know, we have like our own kind of debate club, although it's collapsing practically. But yeah, so I remember I pitched this to my vice principal, and he immediately was like, "I'm very concerned about this." And I was like, why? Why would you be concerned? And, you know, I had to obviously reassure him. And I remember I came back the next day with a few other students that were interested in starting an organization at my school. And we said, what if we have 3 moderators per conversation? We host them on a weekly basis in my history teacher's classroom. And, you know, if things get too heated, we'd calm them down. He was like, you know what? I'll give you like a month. And if this turns into an issue where parents are coming at me, then, you know, you'll have to shut it down real fast. But I reassured him, and we hosted our first discussion, and this was on the TikTok ban. And I was like, this is a good way to ease high school students into talking to one another about this, because I think, you know, we all have our own opinions about it, but it's not as controversial as something like abortion rights or Israel and Gaza, which we got to later. But yeah, it was really interesting, you know, starting to hear these perspectives, and they came out even from students that weren't initially interested in politics or current events. I know we attracted many students to that conversation that had, you know, barely taken a history class. They were just freshmen that had come in and, you know, were just newly introduced to the school, but they felt like this was a community they could connect with. So I wish this was more accessible at other schools, but I'm glad that my school has been able to have this. I think another major part has been also, as I know Ishan brought this up too, is the solution piece of this, and, you know, forming solutions. Although we're high school students, obviously we're not lawmakers yet. We can still, you know, some of us maybe.
Exactly.
We can still, you know, think of solutions and put ourselves in the perspective of, you know, we're not enemies. Again, we're literally, 15 to 18-year-olds, right? And we want to create a better America. You know, this is the whole point of view that we're coming from. Obviously, we have diverse experiences, and, you know, we all have our differing opinions, and they can be, you know, simple like we don't agree with the TikTok ban, or they can be like abortion, which we had that conversation, and, you know, it was controversial. But again, we always come back to, at the end of our discussions, that solution piece. And I think that's been essential, and also, you know, maintaining this club, making sure it's not, you know, being shut down by administrators. But yeah, coming together, we've been able to reaffirm that, and also using just simple civility and, you know, being nice to each other and kind, and coming together at the end and saying we're human, and obviously if we have different opinions, that's okay, but we still want the same end goal of having something so important and coming together.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. My panelists know I'm now going to start adding complexity to this conversation one at a time, and I'll start with the easy one, which is we're talking a lot here about face-to-face interaction. Let's start throwing in social media now.
Ooh.
When it comes to now within the context of social media and thinking about digital democracy and engagement, how do you start to tackle it in that level and civil discourse and so on? Yeah. And who wants to go first?
Anyone? Oh my gosh. Well, I can speak to TikTok a lot.
Yeah, let's start with TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's been a very interesting platform, and I think, you know, we're all aware of it as a generation. You know, now I just see, like, I'll be just, I run my own organization, so I'm constantly with younger students, and they'll, like, pull out their iPads. They'll always be on TikTok. And I'm like, Okay, but let's just put it away for a little. Regardless, I'm still glued to the app sometimes, so I can speak to it. I remember actually this was like a week ago, and Ishan told me to bring this up, so I'm going to. But I was going through a comment section, and it was a video of lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and the conversation was, the Senate and the House of Representatives, they have power of the purse. I thought that was Congress, and I was like, oh my gosh. And all of the comments, all the replies to the comment it was all agreeing. It was like, oh, wait, yeah, you have a point there. And I said, there's clearly an issue, which is where you're getting your information from. And I think high schoolers especially, they haven't been taught how to process this. And obviously technology, all of this is new. We have so much new AI technology too, and it really plays into, is this real, is this not? But I think a lot of high school students don't understand that, and that needs to be something that's more emphasized by their schools. And even within a civics class or a government class itself, just taking maybe 5 minutes to understand how you can do proper research on subjects, how you can connect it back, and how you can also use that for your own engagement and your own discourse. Because when students are using this, they clip onto information that can be totally false, and then they have conversations, and they're backed by this misinformation.
So Sophia, before we go further, so that's an incredibly thoughtful approach. How did you learn it?
How did I learn?
How did you learn to go check the data, and where did you get that?
I think I've been lucky enough to have this family background, especially with my dad being a political science professor. So that's obviously kind of a cheat code to life.
It's the first time I've heard political science mentioned in a positive way. Okay.
Yeah, I love political science.
Paul
Come on.
Carisi, excited there.
But yeah, and also alongside that, running my own organization has created an avenue for me to also have to fact check my information, because obviously when you go, I go into so many classrooms on a weekly basis, and they're all very young students, and of course we have to be very careful with the information that we're providing to them, because obviously if we're wrong, that's just, number one, it's embarrassing, and number two, you gotta shut this whole thing down. If we're wrong about something as simple as a piece of current events that we've heard about, that's just not good. So through that experience, and I create weekly presentations on current events, I've had to be very careful, and we've had to get this fact checked, and going through multiple people. We have 5 sponsors currently for my organization. They all go through our presentations and fact check them. So I've been through that experience, but I think more high schoolers can just learn it through curriculum and through that edition. Yeah.
Other thoughts on social media? Ishan, you want?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in as a fellow TikTok connoisseur myself. I think 2 things can be learned very clearly from TikTok and its impact on the ease of information. The first thing is youth and students like me prefer short-form content in a way that's digestible and easy as a mode of learning. That's one of the reasons, as Sophia brought up, we're a lot more likely to trust TikTok than, say, a politician is speaking online or on the news. But secondly, I think with this ease of information transfer, it becomes super important where nowadays I feel me and my peers are often fed opinions in the sense that we're forced to take a stand, and often that stand aligns with what the media wants us to believe. And I think where that solution needs to come from is the increase of civic frameworks, and as I spoke about before, kind of the civic principles that are enduring about the founding of our government and the founding of our nation. And they don't just need to be about popular sovereignty and separation of powers. They can be drilled down onto specific issues that are very pertinent. In the same line with TikTok, one of the biggest issues these days is data privacy. Consider what youth like Sophia and I and the rest of this panel see when we view the news of TikTok on TikTok. We're seeing congressional hearings where United States senators and representatives are asking questions like, can TikTok access the contents of my home Wi-Fi network? And rather than understanding and digesting the issues head on about data privacy and the role of corporations and the government and how they interact, that's kind of the image that we see from media. And so I think a civics curriculum is very effective if it kind of addresses some of the history. What's the history behind the judicial system and how it interacts with big tech and the government? This means learning about judicial court cases and things like FTC versus Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica case. I think there's a lot of history that doesn't have to just be like founding principles of the government, but are still pertinent to civic issues and how we interact with entities, both private and public. And I think media has given us the short form content and has shown policymakers what youth really value in terms of information diffusion. It's just about giving us the civic framework so we can develop individual opinions based on what we see from media.
And Ishan, in your case, I mean, you talk about civic knowledge, which I love because, when we talk about civic preparation, it's not just the skills we've been talking about, but also the information behind it and understanding it. Where did you learn it? Did you learn it in school?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of it is research for debate and understanding kind of the history behind policies. A lot of it is like national level policy. So when I'm researching immigration laws, like what is the recent history of just say president's executive orders and what are the different political stances? I think when being educated about these things, it comes from understanding of a wide variety of our government. The executive branch, what are the president's executive orders? The judicial system, what are past court cases that have affected this issue and that should guide our kind of arguments when we draw upon them. So I guess the debate angle is really where I've kind of learned although it's in the process of generating arguments, I think the key aspects of understanding how policies are related to government and the founding principles is really what draws these arguments together. And allows these arguments on both sides to agree.
Yuqing, Mahavir?
Yeah, if I could add, I guess a layer of or approach this issue from like maybe a different angle.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly important to have more practical skills taught to students to help them navigate this new digital landscape, such as critical reading skills, pre-bunking, lateral reading. I think there's also a deeper issue we need to grapple with, not just young people, but just in general, the way we've seen media kind of come apart and become polarized. And I think it's a deeper, I guess, philosophical question, if you will, of what facts are, right? Like, do we consume facts? Do they just come into us? Or do we interpret them, right? And I think...
Wait, you're not a philosopher by any chance, are you? Okay, got it.
And I think we interpret facts, and which is why there's this massive divide in our country, because we interpret facts in very, very different ways, and they form very different perceptions of the world. So I think getting across to young people, and even older folks too, this notion that there is no like a neutral set of facts, or at least you never consume facts in a neutral way, but rather through a particular lens that's formed by your understanding, upbringing, experiences, and temperaments, is probably the most important thing to do. And I think media sources like All Sides, who present all the different headlines and articles, so you see how different media sources have presented one issue and how differently that kind of shapes people's understanding of that issue, really helps break down this notion that there is neutral reporting and there is a correct story and a false story. Sure, there's definitely misinformation, right? But I think the way we're divided, we're not divided because of misinformation, we're divided because of our fundamental differences in the way we interpret things.
So Yuqing, let's take this for a moment a little further, right? Because the obvious place it goes is literally information bubbles, right? Where we're getting completely different sets of information and therefore different interpretation. Do you see that even at Stanford? Are there information bubbles here, or is there the wrestling and pushing of ideas?
I think not as much, right? Because Stanford, being a college campus, is pretty ideologically homogenous, right? It's mostly, most folks are pretty progressive or liberal, and there is a smaller conservative presence. But I think the same issue does manifest. We have a very small, albeit a very small and very active conservative student population. There's the Stanford Review, there's other student conservative groups on campus, and they've kind of bunkered down because they've had such a small presence, and they have been persecuted, right? I would go as far as to say that for their views, and they've been marginalized for their views over the past decade. And now that we're kind of opening up and promoting constructive dialogue and critical inquiry and viewpoint diversity, they've kind of, they're still bunkered in. And we kind of need to do more to kind of bring them out of that bubble. Yeah. Whether that be through dialogue, whether that be through acknowledging different interpretations of, a set of events. Yeah.
Thank you. Mahavir, anything on social media?
Yeah, I really enjoyed actually your question of how do you know that, or where did you learn that, right? And so I think it's quite interesting. So for me, right, when I joined the military, I joined at age 17. So I didn't know what I didn't know. But what I can tell you is and I think it's kind of been validated on this panel, is when we're so young, digital literacy is not really taught. I think we all know that Wikipedia is not a credible source because it's been beaten into me in English class. No matter what you do not cite Wikipedia. I got that, 10, 12 years later. But it's interesting when we talk about digital literacy because we don't really teach it. And one political science class is not going to teach it for our young students coming up in universities or high schools. And it really has to be ingrained in us. And we learn through repetition. And so trying to relate that into my experiences is in the military, we have a great thing called OPSEC. We have these annual trainings that we have to do every year, and we all kind of roll our eyes at it, but it teaches us a really, really important lesson. What it teaches us is a little bit more about digital literacy and how to take in information and what is facts and what is not, and then also kind of give yourself a gut check, If it doesn't smell right and it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And so taking that to industry, I think something that everybody in this room can relate to is many of our companies ask us to take information security training or digital literacy training. And there's a reason for it. It's a very important reason, and that is to build up our digital literacy, make us to question things. I mean, I think we as people are naturally curious, and I think that's one pitfall in our kind of civics learning as we're being brought up in America is we're not taught that at the point in our lives where we're most moldable, where we can really be shaped. I know for my junior Marines, it's easy for me to just say, hey man, you're not gonna do it, and they don't do it, and that sticks with them for the rest of their lives. I mean, to this day, I talk to friends 10 years later, and we kind of joke about things that Sergeant Callie told them to do, and it stays with them today. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that question, so that's awesome.
So let me continue to expand this, and in these last 10 minutes, what I'd like to do now is move beyond you. You are incredibly accomplished. You have done great things. Thank you for your service in so many different ways. I want now to expand this out to your peers, right? And talking about kind of the larger set. I won't hold you accountable to what you say about others, don't worry. But I'd like to get a sense from you of when you start to think about the populations you engage with, the population, the age that you're in, kind of how they are in terms of civic preparation. And so once again, let me throw down the gauntlet. I'll talk about one specific question, and we'll see where it goes. Do your peers believe in American democracy?
Absolutely.
No.
I would say not really.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Discuss.
I think we had this conversation last night over dinner as well about the polarization of American institutions, right? And I'm kind of made the suggestion that I thought, the military was more conservative, and the trust among liberals of the military has declined, whereas for universities, it's the inverse. Very progressive liberal institutions, and the trust among conservatives of universities has declined. And I think belief in American democracy is a very good proxy question that kind of gets at that.
For me, I think I want to dig one layer deeper to that, right? So if it is true, if it is that the military leans a little bit more conservative or universities lean a little bit more to the left, whatever you want to call it, I think that is democracy. Democracy is the difference of opinions, right? And it's how do we foster those difference of opinions and make sure that we can have open dialogue about them. In the military, it's quite interesting because no matter what you are, no matter who you are, you're green in the end of the day. Maybe you're a light green Marine or you're a dark green Marine, but you're green. And so the difference of opinions is actually quite welcomed. Now, obviously, I can't control who the military attracts and who joins the military, but however, I think I think the preservation of our democracy and the trust of our democracy it's very alive and well. It's just flavored a little bit differently. I think today, I think it's just a little bit different. I think if we can come to a balance, if we can open dialogue and just respect each other's opinions, I think then we won't feel so polarized in our universities or wherever we may be in life, whether one way is more conservative, one way is more liberal, it doesn't matter. But the fact of the matter is we believe in this experiment of America, and we need to have open dialogue, but also a word that you use that I love is curiosity.
Yeah.
We need to have every discussion with curiosity and with open-mindedness, so that way our difference of opinions can be accepted. If I disagree with somebody, I can accept that difference of opinion, and maybe I'll change my opinion, but I don't know. But we have to talk about it to find out.
Amen.
Ishan, Sophia, what about your peers?
Yeah,
Do they believe in American democracy?
I would say a lot of my peers have lost a lot of faith, and I can't blame them, because when you see things and you see giant headlines, and of course we're attracted to those, we just see the big things, like we're going to go with it. But they see those and, they think, oh, we're doomed. Like, I've had that told to me multiple times, like, oh, there's nothing we can do. But I think that's because there's a lack of involvement. And obviously, you need to have discussions also, but there's also a volunteering component, and there's this engagement with a local community that needs to happen. That's not really happening, especially in my school district. I mean, you receive the basic education, you have the government requirement, you have the history requirements, which are waning in Indiana, but they're still here as of right now. And when you have this kind of component, students are learning it, but again, they're not taught to apply it. So for me, I love volunteering in my community and going out and doing whatever I can, but I know that is not accessible to a lot of students, and a lot of students don't know about these opportunities. So, and especially with local government and that connection, I think that's something I've had to force in my work and, reach out and form my own programs for that, because they have not been existing whatsoever. So I think when you connect this and you actually have high school students go and talk to their local city councils, I think the faith kind of comes back, and I think they understand that there's a lot they can do, regardless of if they're voting age. Like, I'm not, and I know Ishan's not either, but we still do a lot, and we still can make that impact in our community by going and talking to school boards and doing this. So I think that's part of restoring the faith, is really getting into the community and that local action.
Ishan?
Yeah, I want to go along the same line as Sophia and talk about how one of the main pillars of democracy is participation in government, and students and youth are more likely to participate in a government that's more receptive and responsive to what we want. So I think I want to go a little bit into what would this look like in learning on both like a formal sense and an informal sense. First, in a formal sense, it's mostly about curriculum. I know previous panels were talking about how states all have their own curriculum standards, their own beliefs of what can and can't be discussed in the classroom. I think what can really draw states together and find common ground when it comes to civic learning is really this experiential and service-based curriculum as a part of civics. I know the California State Legislature is working on a policy to do this right now for grades 1 through 8. But when I talk about service-based civic learning, it means students are learning how to be a citizen, in school and in their community. And there's a lot of good curriculum that's great for that, and I think more states need to kind of adopt that. But secondly, I'd agree, sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes states aren't going to pass curriculum changes for more civic education. And so informal education and informal civic participation is equally as important. And I think a clear distinction to make is when we want more trust in institutions, I think the place to start is local institutions. Local institutions where students actually feel they have a stake in the decisions that they're making. One of my favorite examples is when I was on the board last October for our county office, we were considering a charter school to be renewed. And we had students from that school, 100 plus, come up and speak to us about what they felt about the school. Most of things were good things, but they held their principals, administrators, and the school CEO accountable. And so I think when students have a stake in these local decisions, as Sophia mentioned, in youth city councils, for me in local school boards which affect our education, that's where we can really participate in government and be engaged on many different frameworks.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know we're running out of time, but if I could offer perhaps an alternative to what you both suggest as the solution to the issue of loss of trust in democracy and faith in our local institutions. What what if the issue isn't us? What if the issue isn't our loss of trust, but what if the issue is democracy itself or our institutions themselves? And I think that's why at least college students have lost trust. And I think the alternative maybe could be posed is that maybe we shouldn't focus on restoring students' trust by getting them to rethink about democracy or rethink about local institutions, but rather have them engage more critically with democracies and be more critical and engage in this like discursive exercise so that institutions and democracy will change and refine and be better. Yeah.
So lightning round, we're going to go over by about a minute, but I just want to ask each of you as we close out, why do you engage civically? Like what drives you in a couple sentences at most? Who wants to go first?
I can
Go
take
ahead.
it.
Okay, we'll start down there and go this direction.
Yeah,
and close
for
it out.
me, what really drove me was students like me and the rest on this panel go to school every single day, but there's so much behind the scenes that we just don't see. In my school district, there's huge budgetary shortfalls that affect student programs. So my really quest for civics, especially on the local level, was if programs and these local government institutions are affecting students in our everyday lives, we should have some stake in it. We should be able to express our opinions, and not just express our opinions, but hopefully have these local politicians and school board representatives actually respond to us. And that's really what has driven me to kind of push the boundary of youth participation in local civics, whether it's on like my county board of education or my local school district. That's a big motivating factor.
Mahavir?
Yeah, for me, I think it all boils down to the veteran. I think everything I do is for the veteran in mind. So local communities, veterans we go back to America, but we go back to our local communities. And that's where we find jobs, that's where you build a family. We do everything. And so fostering veteran growth is really my focus and what drives me. But it goes back down to the thing of, do you have a voice? So kind of very similar to young people. How do we find that voice? It almost seems like we're somewhat underrepresented, some of the time. We go to school board meetings and it's always parents or, concerned citizens chiming up and really giving their opinions. But how do we engage young people? How do we engage youth? And on the contrast, how do we engage veterans? And how do we ask veterans, what are your challenges? Well, what do you want from your community? You live in the community just like I live in the community. So what can we do to foster your growth or the community growth? And I think why youth is so important, especially young veterans, the reason it's so important is they're the future. They're future leaders. They're going to be living in this country long before the leaders that are sitting in the seat today. So we need to take their opinions and validate their opinions and see how we can shape this experiment of a democracy that we have. So definitely veteran growth is what drives me.
Thank you, Mahavir. Eugene?
I think for me it's inclusion. I think in the most expansive sense. Not just inclusion of diverse demographics and backgrounds, but inclusion of diverse beliefs, perspectives, and viewpoints. And I think for me personally, I think what really defines a person, what really defines an individual, is what they believe and is how they see the world. And I want to, through dialogue and dialogue as a form of civic skill and civic education, foster a college campus, foster a community, a country that's the most inclusive.
Thank you, Eugene.
I would say from a very young age, I was always asking questions, and I was, I'm very involved in my community. We would always be at like the farmers market or doing like little local events. And I remember it was something that changed with me. It was pretty early on, but I was asking these questions. I was asking my dad things every single day. And I remember I started complaining a lot about our like local city government, their decisions. And I mean, that also reflected like state opinions that I had. But I remember I went up to him and I said, I just don't agree with this. He goes, why don't you do something about it? And I said, I don't, because I think like age is a barrier. And I think that's something that a lot of youth feel like, and I did bring this up a little earlier, but I think that's a major obstacle and something that I overcame. And I understood that I have so many personal experiences, I mean, even like in the medical field, that have affected me and have affected my family. And I learned pretty early on, from my dad and from my teachers even, that I could create this reality by simply going in and getting involved. So that's, the angle.
Thank you, Sophia. Now you understand why I have the best job of all day today. Please join me in thanking this remarkable panel.